Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's guest is Dr. Lawrence D. Goodridge, Associate Professor of Food Microbiology at the Center for Meat Safety and Quality, Department of Animal Sciences at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado. Dr. Goodridge's primary research interests encompass characterization of genetic determinants of antibiotic and sanitizer resistance in bacteria isolated from food production animals. Larry has also done research on non-thermal food processing methods for minimally processed foods. He was an assistant professor at the University of Wyoming. Receiving his degrees and postdoctorate at the University of Guelph in Canada, with a major emphasis in food microbiology and food safety, Dr. Goodridge is currently focused on the development of novel diagnostics and methods for control contamination of food-borne pathogens, with a specific focus on development of detection methods and prophylaxis for E. coli 015787. Today's topic is food producer liability for food safety, not reliance on third-party auditors. Now introducing Dr. Larry Goodridge. Larry?
Hello.
Welcome to the show. Would you like to add anything to your introduction?
No, just that it's always a pleasure to be able to come on and to discuss issues related to food safety and how to make our food safe.
Wonderful. Today's topic is food producer responsibility for food safety, not third-party auditors. What is food safety in a food production facility, Dr. Goodridge?
Well, food safety refers to the fact that, we produce our food, whether it's vegetables or meat or other commodities, in environments that have bacteria. The soil has bacteria, water has bacteria, manure has quite a bit of bacteria, and so our food is grown in those environments. And so that means that there's a potential for the actual food that we eat to be contaminated with harmful food-borne bacteria that can get from the soil and water, manure, and so forth into the food. So when we are discussing food safety in a food production facility, the idea is to limit the chances of contamination occurring in these foods, and then to, at the same time, achieve that by developing interventions that can reduce or kill the bacteria if they're present.
Wonderful. So food safety is the food producer's responsibility. What are the standards to assure food safety?
Well, depending on the food commodity, there's several standards that are available. If we're talking about processed foods, such as meats or other processed foods, then the hazard analysis critical control point is a program that is used, in which the idea is that if you can develop steps along the way and identify critical control points along the food production process where contamination might occur or where bacteria can grow, and then you control the chances of that happening at each of those points, then when the final food product is produced, there should be a decreased chance of that product being contaminated. That's for processed foods. For fruits and vegetables, we unfortunately don't have as yet any real way to control or kill pathogens during harvest and processing. So in those commodities, then we would rely on what are called good agricultural practices, which refer to a set of steps that one can take during planting, growth, and harvest of the fresh produce. And then when that produce is being processed, washed, and packed, for example, in a processing shed, then one could also follow what are called good handling practices, which refers to some standard practices one can take to again, try to minimize contamination of the product with bacteria that can cause human illness.
Excellent. What are food safety audits, and how do they guarantee food safety?
Well, so there's a two-part question there. Food safety audits have become popular in the last few years, and this is because growers and producers of, and we're really talking about all food, from fresh produce on to other processed foods, but the customers that buy the product from the growers or producers. So, I'm talking about retail chains like Walmart and Kroger and Target, for example, have increasingly began to ask that the producers that sell to them have a food safety plan in place, and this currently includes auditing. And so an audit is and there's different kinds of audits, but an audit, as it's generally done, occurs where a company or a person, so-called third-party auditor, would come into that plant or the food production premises and conduct a walkthrough and simply ask the question, are the food production practices in compliance with federal guidelines or other guidelines as mandated by the industry? And there's several reasons, in addition to the fact that, retail chains might require third-party audits, that they're done. And these include the fact that, there could be a genuine desire to improve food safety or the quality or sanitation at the plant. It often can confer, if it's done properly, a potential marketing advantage where that product is viewed as more safe than perhaps other products. It can help with troubleshooting and problem solving. And so these are the reasons that food safety audits or third-party audits are conducted.
Very good. There has been a great deal of press lately about food safety audits, particularly in a case for which you are particularly astute. And if you could review for us your participation in a recent conference that the governor of the state of Colorado convened on food safety and your presentation there.
Yeah, so several weeks ago I was invited to be a keynote speaker at the annual Governor of Colorado Agricultural Forum, where the theme this year was food safety, and I was able to talk about the recent outbreak of Listeria monocytogenes in cantaloupe that were grown in Colorado and the impacts of that. And I discussed the outbreak. As of right now, we know that there were 146 people sickened, and I believe as of right now the death toll is 32 people and one miscarriage. And we talked about why the outbreak occurred. And as part of that discussion, one thing that came up was third-party auditing, because we know that the facility was audited shortly before the outbreak and was given a very high rating, and yet the outbreak occurred. So we discussed the circumstances surrounding that and some of the consequences that occurred because of that, and also the potential disconnect, which is I feel there's a disconnect between the auditors and the growers with respect to the expectations of both parties.
Dr. Goodridge, could you review that disconnect and highlight for our listenership as a learning experience what we can do to unify those two mindsets as far as auditing and food production?
Okay, so auditors. First of all, the main issue with the disconnect is this: third-party auditors represent just one step along the whole food safety continuum of inspection and assessment of one's food safety practices. whereas growers and producers often feel that third-party auditing is the only food safety step. And so there's differences in expectations. A grower may expect a food safety or third-party auditor to come in and look through their practices, and if they're giving a passing grade, then they may feel that ensures that the food safety practices that they are conducting are adequate or superior. But on the third-party auditor side, they are merely doing a walkthrough to make sure that what you're doing is in compliance with federal regulations and so forth, or industry regulations. And the disconnect comes because it's important to understand that these audits are usually conducted during a single day, a given day. And that represents a single period in the entire food production period, which could last, if you're a fresh produce, several months, for example. So the auditor arrives on a single day and walks through. More than that, the visits are often announced, and so this gives the producer and grower time to prepare for that. And so, in other words, when the auditor is present, they may not see what the actual true situation is. And then when you couple that with the expectations of the growers, then we see that there's a potential issue there for food safety. And so one of the things that I think is slowly changing is that the traditional one-day third-party safety and quality audits are beginning to be slowly replaced by multiple-day audits. And more than that, these audits are becoming increasingly more accredited from food safety certification groups with independent oversight, such as some of these are Safe Quality Food or ISO 22000, for example. So I see some of those changes happening. But at the forum, when I gave my talk, I really stressed the fact that producers of food have to become responsible for their own food safety. Up until now, there's been a reliance on these third-party audits. And if you get a passing grade, then this means you are producing safe food, and therefore the producer does not have to worry. That is actually incorrect, and has never been correct. The producers of food must be responsible for their own food safety, and they need to have some rudimentary knowledge of food safety and what to look for during their food production processing that may be a red flag. Because the third-party auditing system is fairly generic. We have many different commodities of food that are produced. And one of the challenges is that third-party auditors are generalists, but their commodities are very specific and may have very specific food safety issues. And so this highlights some changes that I think need to be made in the third-party auditing system.
Excellent suggestions and excellent focus for food producers. You and I discussed previously what most safety officers, those that are wearing this responsibility, this hat, what's their background generally? Are they qualified in the sense that they have education, training, and experience in the very narrow area of food safety?
So I believe that generally speaking, we're stereotyping here or speaking generally, but generally I believe that this is a big problem with the current third-party auditing industry, if you want to call it that. And that is the industry is largely unregulated. And so you, like any industry, I believe you'll have auditors who are very qualified and some who aren't. And because it's unregulated, there are no real educational requirements. And so, and again, because, auditors tend to inspect a wide variety of foods, I believe their education is very wide but not very deep. And so what I think needs to happen, first of all, is that anybody who's going to conduct a third-party audit should at the very least have a good, strong background in food safety and food microbiology. And by that I mean, a Bachelor of Science degree in these areas, at the very least. And maybe even more. But at the very least, I believe they should have a good 4-year degree in food safety and food microbiology, so they understand the relationship between bacteria and viruses and foods and how they can contaminate the foods and so forth. Next, I really think that there needs to be a paradigm shift in how audits are conducted, and that is that rather than being a generalist, perhaps we should have third-party auditing firms that only conduct audits on fresh produce, and others that may conduct audits on processed meats and so forth, because then one can develop commodity-specific audits. As of right now, the third-party audits are not commodity-specific. They're very generic. And I think that certain commodities have higher risk for contamination of food-borne pathogens. And therefore, those so-called high-risk commodities may have certain conditions that need to be specifically addressed in a specific commodity-specific way as opposed to a general way. So I think we really need to see the training of the auditors in food safety and food microbiology, and then commodity-specific training of auditors and commodity-specific auditing practices. And then as
Excellent.
part of that, and I was just going to add, as part of that, I also think that we need to see, and we are beginning to see this more and more, but commodity-specific good agricultural practices, where, again, the actual commodity being grown is taken into account and specific directives are given for that, as opposed to a very general set of good agricultural practices that, while having a general impact on food safety, may not directly address some of the specific concerns with a given commodity.
Dr. Goodridge, those suggestions are excellent follow-throughs for the industry. And from your platform of being a professor and the confidence that the governor of the state of Colorado have given you, your perspective offers very fruitful, substantive suggestions for the industry. What are other actions that best enhance food safety and food production?
Well, I think that there has to be, first, a commitment by the food producer to food safety. It's often thought of as afterthought or a pain, a nuisance that one has to address. I really believe that in order for us to produce safe food, food safety has to be an integral component. From the time that the food is, or our company is thinking about even producing food or growing food for the first time, food safety needs to be an integral part of that, woven into the fabric of the whole food production process. The food industry is largely a reactive industry, and that is no changes are made until there's an outbreak. And then there's a scramble to institute changes. I think we need to become proactive, where as potential issues arise, changes are made to address those issues. Because most large foodborne outbreaks occur because of a combination of events. The recent Listeria outbreak, there were several events that happened that all conspired to form this outbreak. And so the idea, I believe, is that if one is being proactive during food production, then as problems arise, they can be dealt with so that the chain of events that would lead to an outbreak is never completed. So I think those are some of the issues. On the governmental side, there's a lot of controversy about regulations and mandatory versus voluntary regulations. And I think there's a lot of controversy because there's an us versus them type of mentality between the growers and the government, where the growers feel that this is just another regulation that is being shoved down, their throats. This is where, as I've said, a grower really embracing food safety, this is where that comes into it. Because if the growers really embrace food safety, then they wouldn't see it as a regulation or a forced thing or another nuisance, because they would actually be doing these practices. One of the things that has really changed in the last 20 years is the increase in litigation as a result of foodborne outbreaks. And I believe that's really driving, or that will be what really drives the increase in food safety practices at the producer level, because almost every time there's an outbreak, there will be lawsuits, and that results in significant economical damage to the producer.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Goodridge. As a matter of fact, in one of my previous interviews, I interviewed a lawyer who has successfully extracted more than $600 million from food producers as a result of foodborne pathogen litigation.
Yes, absolutely. And I unfortunately, I think that number will only increase. And the way to make it decrease, I think, again, is to have food safety integrated, not to be an afterthought. This is what I try and tell any growers or producers that I speak to. It has to be part of an integral part of the food production process. And I understand that there's challenges associated with that. For example, it increases the cost of the product. There's issues associated with enough employees to be able to do things properly. But the cost of perhaps hiring some more employees and implementing food safety practices is far outweighed by the cost that would be accrued through litigation. And also, of course, the unfortunate issues associated with foodborne outbreaks and deaths. I don't think any food producer enters into food production with an idea that their product could make people sick. And so I think all of these things should be motivations when one is considering implementing a food safety plan, or whether that would be too expensive, for example.
Very good. Your suggestions, I'm sure, were very attentively listened to by our listenership. Would you like to review for them your current research studies and projects?
Sure. So I conduct a wide variety of research projects related to the production of food, and where that food is fresh produce such as leafy greens and tomatoes and cantaloupes now, or where that food is meat, regardless of, and typically livestock-derived meat. So with an emphasis on beef and maybe pork. So in my research, we have several thrusts. The first and major one is the development of rapid methods to detect the harmful bacteria and viruses and parasites that may be found in our foods. And our goal here is to develop methods that could be done faster. One of the issues with food testing for bacteria and so forth is that it takes a long time, at least 24 hours and up to 72 or even 96 hours before a test result is known. And by that time, the food has been shipped to the retail. And even more than that, consumers may have purchased that food. And even more than that, they may have already began to eat that food if it's a fresh commodity like fresh produce. And so one can imagine that after they start to eat that food, within 3 or 4 days of it being produced, then we get the test result back that says the food's contaminated. And this is why on the news you might hear recalls and destroy the food or take it back to the grocery store, etc. But what I try to do is develop tests that will be much faster than 1 day or more, so that we can actually test the food before it actually leaves for retail. That way, if it's contaminated, it would not be shipped to retail. There would be no recalls because it wouldn't be in the grocery stores. No one would eat it, and this should lead to a decrease in food outbreaks. Another aspect of my research is development of ways to kill the bacteria in foods. With meat, we have the ultimate processing step, which is heat. And so if everybody cooks their meat properly, then even if there's bacteria there, they will be destroyed. But in fresh commodities like fresh produce, fresh vegetables and fruits, there is no kill step. So this means that by and large, if the product is contaminated, if the commodity is contaminated in the field, even though we wash it at processing and it might be washed at home, by and large, that really does not do very much to remove the pathogen. So there's a huge need to come up with ways to kill any bacteria that may be present there that can make us sick, while, of course, maintaining the quality and freshness of the fresh produce that we all enjoy. So that's a second aspect of my research. And then the third aspect is trying to understand how antibiotic resistance is formed in bacteria, why that is, how do we decrease the spread of antibiotic resistance among bacteria during production of foods. And the reason for this research is because if those bacteria make us sick, and there have been several examples of where that has happened, and we require treatment with antibiotics to overcome that infection, then those antibiotics that we use are largely becoming less effective because of the presence of these antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So those are the three main areas of my research.
Excellent. All three areas are in exact compliance with the notion of this show and the intent, the AME Food Testing Show, is to get food producers away from the model of shipping and praying that their products don't make people sick, and into the mode of testing prior to shipment and then releasing to the market once they are reasonably assured that the product is safe for the general public to consume. Well, Dr. Goodridge, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I'd like to allow you at this time to offer your closing remarks to the listenership, which is primarily food safety officers, food quality officers, quality control, quality assurance, and food production officers.
Well, in closing, I'd just like to say that, the U.S. food supply is one of the safest in the world. We have 48 million cases approximately each year, which translates to 1 in 6 people becoming ill. And there are many people who will die from an illness. So while it is one of the safest in the world, we still have work to do. And our goal should be to reduce that burden of foodborne illness to as low an amount as we can do. And I think only by working collaboratively, that is, the growers working with researchers from the university and the food processors working with the researchers from the university, and also working together with the government, can we achieve this? We shouldn't see this as we shouldn't be at odds with one another. We should rather see this as a collaborative process, with the ultimate goal being that our food supply, which is already fairly safe, will become even more safe in the future if we can work together.
Outstanding. I'd like to express my appreciation to you, Dr. Goodridge, for your excellent comments and discussion today, and invite anyone who is further interested in learning from you to approach your contact information on this web page. Thank you again, Dr. Goodridge, and wish you a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Goodbye.